Well, look, good evening and welcome to the premiere of the Center for Politics' newest national television documentary, Ball of Confusion, about the raucous 1968 presidential election, and really about the year 1968. We thought the country was falling apart, or was coming apart, and some of you remember it. If you lived through 1968, you couldn't possibly forget it even though you wanted to. And if you're young and haven't learned about 1968, you will once you see this film. And you'll also be treated to a nearly complete version of the Temptations song, Ball of Confusion. And let me tell you something, the Temptations are going to have a very Merry Christmas based on what we had to pay to use their song. So if you plan to send them a Christmas gift, don't bother. They're completely taken care of. I had no idea those songs cost so much, but it was well worth it. Anyway, that presidential campaign, of course, was between among the Republican candidate Richard Nixon, Democratic candidate Hubert Humphrey, and the highly controversial third-party candidate George Wallace, who ran on a third-party platform, and he was really an independent. Now, tonight's event is also the first in a year-long series of events proposed by our university president, Teresa Sullivan, who happens to have joined us tonight with her husband, law professor Doug Laycock. Please give them a warm welcome. And I'm sorry, Terry, I'm going to ask you to stand up and put on your Halloween hat because I want everyone to see what the president looks like with their Halloween hat on. People were so shocked they didn't get photos, so you don't have to worry about that appearing anywhere. In any event, President Sullivan came up with an idea over the summer, a series called Things Every Voter Should Know. And that's what we're going to be doing over the next year and a few months. In addition to tonight's focus on political history, we're partnering with colleagues across the university to cover a host of other topics, including immigration, the news media, foreign policy, polling, and the economy, just to name a few. So when you see these advertised, the President's series on the election, things you should know prior to voting in 2016, be sure to put it on your calendar and join us for those other events as well. The next event in this series is actually Sunday, November 8th, and it's another film. We're partnering with the Virginia Film Festival to present Selma, Bridge to the Ballot. And we'll be discussing the importance of voting with three prominent civil rights leaders who actually marched during Selma's Bloody Sunday in 1965. But tonight, our focus is on 1968. We're going to jump all around the calendar. This is 68. Now, all presidential election years are chaotic by nature, but from the start, I think 1968 was far worse. As the year dawned, no one could have believed that President Lyndon Johnson, who loved power, absolutely loved power, would voluntarily give up the office. It really was involuntary, but he voluntarily gave it up, and the power that he enjoyed exercising. But the events forced him to, they took hold, and convinced Johnson that at best he could win another term only narrowly, and probably after further dividing the country. So in that sense, I think he probably did the right thing. With Johnson out, his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, became the logical substitute, though of course he had a strong challenger in Robert F. Kennedy. And we know what happened to Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King in 1968. Now, to discuss the events of 68, just for a few minutes, Richard Nixon, you'd never guess from his looks, the brother of President Richard Nixon, Mr. Edward Nixon. He looks so much like his brother, and he's 17 years younger than President Nixon was. But when he came in at the Charlottesville airport, the TSA guards came up to him and said, "Are you related to President Nixon?" So even after all these years, he's still recognized. Now, he's the youngest of 5 children. They were all sons, including the former president, and brothers Harold, Arthur, and Donald, born to Hannah and Francis Nixon of Whittier, California. Ed married Gay Lynn Nixon in 1957, and they had 2 children, Beth Matheny of Everett, Washington, and Amy Nixon. Where are you, Amy? There you are. You're hiding behind Lena Corrigan there. Amy, stand up. She's joining us this evening, and Amy, we appreciate so much for being here. She has been accompanying her father to everything, and they've seen a lot of things while they were here, and also met with some students yesterday who enjoyed it enormously. Now, as I mentioned, President Nixon was the eldest son with 17 years separating him from Edward, and his older brother was a big influence in his life, really a mentor to him. And Ed, you credit him with having encouraged you to attend college away from California. You wanted to go to Stanford or Caltech, and he insisted that you learn more about the country and to go to Duke, where he had gone to law school. And apparently the President Nixon was very persuasive even back then, because that's exactly what Edward Nixon did. He graduated from Duke in 1952. He spent much of his professional career pursuing the responsible use of natural resources around the globe. He's a geologist, and he told me that means he has rocks in his head, which I thought was good and self-deprecating. After receiving his bachelor's from Duke and his master's from NC State, he embarked on a highly successful career working for and serving as an advisor to several cutting-edge companies in the field of earth science. He's the president of Nixon World Enterprises, a former chairman of Pyron Solar Advisory Board in San Diego, and of course is a member of the board of directors of the Richard Nixon Foundation. And I want to recommend his book to you. It really is worth reading. The Nixons, A Family Portrait. And he tells the story of an ordinary family striving to make a difference in the world and going through some very tough times, and I'm going to ask him about in a moment. He's at the very young age of 85. He is very vigorous. He still works tirelessly, and he cares about steering and encouraging young people toward public service, as he did yesterday with many of my students. So again, join me in giving a warm Virginia welcome to Mr. Edward Nixon and his colleagues. I've told people you have some of the same gestures as your brother, but I didn't know you'd have that one. Not often. Okay. Now look, Ed, tell us a little about your upbringing, which was kind of separated from your older brothers, and yet it was the same, and the era that you grew up in, and the difficulties that your family faced.
Depression years. When you're conceived at the end of the Roaring 20s, and you're born right after the crash, 29, it makes you automatically installed in a world that people were suffering, struggling everywhere. At the time, my very early years, my parents had a grocery store, so none of us went hungry. But a lot of people were hungry, and they'd drive down the San Juan Capistrano, the boulevard, and finding no employment, they'd stop in and ask to do some work, chop wood, whatever we had, in exchange for some food for their children. And growing up in that time, and looking back on it now and comparing it with what we call a crash today, we haven't had a crash yet. It was really bad. And those who are old enough to have lived through that really know we have to avoid that. And that was the influence that underlay all of my efforts in life. I had an aversion to politics, despite my brother's persuasions. He may have been a good lawyer, but he didn't get me on that one. I was influenced by the kind of society we were in at the time. My grade school class, we had 8 years of grade school and then into high school. It comprised of a black girl, 2 Japanese, 4 Mexicans, Jewish kid, all kinds of people, but we weren't aware of any of that. We were buddies. We played together, we worked together, and knowing that, Dick didn't ever tell me this until I was He's a Duke. But he was convinced I needed to see another part of the United States to realize there was work to be done. It wasn't pleasant work, but we've made progress and we have a lot more to make. And bringing the schools together in the 7 southern states that was a very major accomplishment for me to see. But following, I could go on and on here.
Oh, go ahead, we're interested.
Absolutely.
Please, go
I'm
ahead.
advancing too far into the future perhaps, but Watergate pretty much turned off opportunities in the United States for me to do what I wanted to do. So my brother Don and I ventured into overseas work, looking for products, processes, resources, and to bring them together for those that wanted them and then make a deal. The Japanese influenced me greatly. We made several trips to Japan, and then other countries around the world. I leave that to the book.
Well, China, you were in quite a few times.
China,
Logically.
but not until 10 years after Dick had gone there. He persuaded me to wait until the Cultural Revolution dies down a little bit. And it was still going on when I did get over there, but that's pretty well gone. And as we've watched China develop these days, it's phenomenal. Every trip I make, it's moving ahead, moving ahead. They're more modern than we'll ever hope to be because it's all new. They started from zero. And their trains, their airports, old ones are all torn down and new ones are built up. So far advanced that we really have to think about how far behind we are. Go to work on it. Students, study what we need to do. Find out how to pay for it without giving away the store. I could get on another theme, but I better not.
No, that was good. No, absolutely. We're interested in hearing all that. I do want to go back because you said that you and your brother Don, and of course there were 5 sons.
Right.
But to tell us what happened to the other 2, your other 2 brothers.
Arthur was 12 years older than I, died 5 years before I was born. Tuberculosis in 1925. Harold, the oldest of the brothers, was 20 years older than me, 20 years spread, older than me. And he developed tuberculosis as well. And when I was 3, I can vividly remember his passing because the family was all torn up. But a memory starting at the age of 3 has to be cultivated, and that's what you have to do. Family reunions are extremely important. Every year we had at least 2 family reunions with my grandmother, the only grandparent that I knew. Elmira Millhouse. Harold loved to fly. He was blonde and blue-eyed. The rest of us were all dark-haired and brown-eyed. As we grew, the youngest one got to be taller. My brother Dick was 5'11", and I was 6'4", but I still looked up to him. He knew so much and so many techniques to get me turned around from being lazy. If I took an interest in something technical, he'd want to know about it. I mean, he wasn't really interested in technical stuff, but I could get him going, and I regretted later on not being able to have an influence on his decisions when he became president regarding what I consider a mistake. Maybe it wasn't at the time, but today it is. But Oak Ridge, Tennessee had a working molten salt reactor developed by Alvin Weinberg. And at that time, in 1970, we were still trying to build bombs. And uranium is essential. Uranium is far less abundant than thorium, but thorium is the future. And most of us will be gone before it's really made into something. But just last week, the Chinese came over and signed an agreement with our Department of Energy to take all of the research of the Oak Ridge molten salt reactor, and they'll be building it. They have thorium, but so do we. They have rare earths, and they market them because they ignore the thorium, which is mildly radioactive, for the rare earths. If you want to get rare earths today, you got to go through China for some of them, but we have them in the United States. Why aren't we mining them? Well, because our environmentalists, another subject, decided that we don't want to mess with radioactive rocks. The rocks that contain thorium also contain rare earths, and we need those rare earths. We need them for magnets, for motors, for generators. There's so many uses. Where do we have to go for rare earths today? China. I got in the business. I imported some gadolinium oxide. It's still sitting outside of my garage because the guy that ordered it passed away when it came through customs. Those are the breaks of bringing minerals around the world. It's been a fascinating world, though. Getting travel around the world half a dozen times, visiting 40 countries or so. Nothing near what Dick did, but you'll learn so much meeting other people. And following his advice, he said, when you go to another country, don't say a lot. Don't even try to say a lot. Learn how to say it, but don't say it. Listen. Learn all you can. And then when you do have something to say, it may be on another trip, you might make sense to them. It was really true, especially in China. So many times I go to China now and it's red carpet everywhere. They won't let me go anywhere without help, interpreters. Even if I want to learn something, I have to make them speak to me in Chinese so that I can learn something. But that's the life. And it's gone like that. A different world from Dick Nixon. My brother Don was a master in entertaining people. He loved to eat. I'm an ectomorph, as you can see. Don was an endomorph, and Dick was a mesomorph. He was just right.
Well, you said you didn't get into politics, and obviously you didn't, although you did suggest to me in the 70s, President Nixon at least mentioned to you once an open district in Washington State and suggested that you should run for the House seat there, which you dismissed immediately, I gather.
Well, I didn't do it immediately. I gave it serious thought, but knowing that I don't like snap decisions that have to be made, it seems, by representatives. There are too many snap decisions made in Washington. They're not well thought out. Even with all the advisors we have up there, I didn't want to get into that. But somebody has to, so I'm not discouraging anybody. If you want to go to Washington and represent your folks at home, please do it. We need more, especially those that can think before they talk.
Well, that's the very definition of a University of Virginia student. And now, of course, you did do some politics. You did it for your brother. Now, you weren't involved in his House races or Senate race or vice presidential races or even the 1960 race. But you got interested enough in 1967. What did you do and what happened?
Actually, it was 1960, my first engagement.
Oh, it was 60, I'm sorry.
Because we had an old 1937 panel truck, and I dressed it all up with signs. We drove all around the 12th District for Dick's first run for Congress.
Oh, I didn't realize.
But then I had to go back to school. Okay.
All right.
1967, Dick had come down to Portland, Oregon. I think he was really feeling the water as to whether he should run. I think really he had already made up his mind he was going to do it again. And so I drove down from Seattle and visited with him at the old Benson Hotel. And I said, you know, Dick, I've been out of the political world because in graduate school and college you don't do it, and the Navy, at the Hatch Act, you can't do much there. But this time, if you decide to run, I'd like to give you a hand. I'll think about it. Sure enough, February, a couple months later, he calls and said, we'd like you to come back and taken office in the headquarters in New York. The old American Bible Society building had been vacated, and we took over the whole 4 floors. And there we were, 450 Park Avenue, my first exposure to the fastest city in the world, unless you're running against somebody's bumper. That was a fun year, but I don't like to read much. And that was another thing Dick did. He made me read letters to the candidate. You answer all those letters. And we'll give you 75 volunteers that'll come in. They just love to do it. And they'll read them, and they'll decide what kind of an issue has to be answered. And you can stuff them with a statement or something. So I did that throughout the 68 campaign.
That was 150,000 of them, right?
Well,
you had to sign.
That was how many letters were there. I don't know if I signed that many, but it was over 100,000. I don't sign signatures anymore. Not that you can read, anyway.
Politics will cure you of a lot of things. And that's a good example. Now you were at the Miami convention when your brother was nominated the second time for president, and I think that your brother even asked you about Spiro Agnew, did he not?
He knew I had exposure to the folks in Maryland, and he wanted to know if I knew anything about Spiro Agnew. I just know he's the governor. I don't know much about him. Everybody I've talked to say good things about him. So that I had really no influence in his decision, but somebody else must have suggested it more strongly. Spiro Agnew became the running mate.
Well, basically, they eliminated all the other candidates, and no one knew Agnew, including your brother. And that's how he got the vice presidential nomination. But, you know, there are worse things.
That's the way the VPs go.
I'm going to, we could go on for a long time. I know we want to get to the film, but I want to end on a lighter note. Of course, your brother won. It was a difficult campaign, just like 1960. It was a close election. But he won, and you know, you had your own career. Your family had their own path. But I understand that there was a letter sent from a member of your family to. Was it Amy?
No.
No, it was Beth.
Her younger sister.
Your sister Beth. Well, tell me about that letter.
Beth was 8 years old when Dick won the election, and she was a literate one. She could write better than her mom even. A little correction of spelling maybe, but she sent a letter that we didn't know about until about 1971. But what was in the letter had to do with a visit we made to the White House. As a result, she said, "Dear Uncle Dick," and she showed me this letter when we boarded Air Force One. "Dear Uncle Dick, I'm glad you were elected president. I'd like to come and live with you at the White House. Please write and tell me when I can come." We still have the letter.
That's marvelous. I wish we could go on. It has been a marvelous visit. I want you to know how much we have appreciated your taking all this time. He's been here since Wednesday night to learn about us, to be with us, to visit our sites here in the Charlottesville area. And we want you to know, we want Amy to know that you're always welcome. You have a lot of friends here now. And we hope you're going to enjoy Ball of Confusion. I'll be sitting close to you. If you don't, you can hit me. But without any further delay, ladies and gentlemen, the premiere of Ball of Confusion.